see my next slide as well? Because then I can keep the time.
Sure.
Yeah.
So when we go to it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's when I can I can plan what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yep. Good. Perfect. Then I don't need my other watch.
No.
I don't see what time it is.
No. It's just going to be it's just like a presentation with some questions after, and roving mics. We'll need the roving mics afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much for coming back so promptly. Appreciate it. Okay, so the last part of the day today is about ICT procurement, and the first session will be Brigitta Norton from Capgemini. Her session will be assessing accessibility through the ICT procurement process, and that will lead on into a workshop that Bri will introduce. Over to Bri.
Thanks, Jerry. Hi, everyone. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, but I'm just going to give you a little baseline of where we're at with, what I've seen lately with ICT procurement. So I'm going to start with a couple of years ago, John Sheridan spoke at our 2016 OZeWAI conference. I've shared my slides, and the link is here as well to that presentation that was live streamed as well. And he was talking about the change to Australian standards. What he was talking about was that we were looking to implement Australian standards for ICT procurement, and they had been investigating what other countries were doing. So as he was presenting a couple of years ago, he talked about that he thought that in the Australian Public Service that they were doing quite well with procurement. And one of the quotes here is from that talk. He says that already what we are doing in the public service was trying to ensure that people who needed special consideration in terms of extra equipment or something like that were actually having their needs met after the fact. And that was a little bit of an eye-opener for him. It was all happening after the fact. And I think what we were looking at was what was happening at that time, and now we can kind of consider, has there been an improvement? So what he did is he talked about the Australian standards, which ended up adopting the European EN 301549. And we've got Susanna following on, who's going to tell us a little bit more about the update to that. And what he talked about was that change and how that was actually going to set those standards for ICT procurement for all of us to follow. What ended up happening is, have we seen any change? Not so sure. So everyone kind of knows that those Australian standards are there. So a few months ago I was working at the DTA, and we got a few people from the APS to come and share their stories. I found in the short time that I was there in that role, I had started connecting with different people from different areas in the APS who used assistive technologies, and I was asked by a lot of people, can I get people to test, do usability testing? And some of these people were happy to do that, but some of them didn't want to. They just wanted to share their stories. So we set up a get-together with some of these people, and I started to share their stories. And one of the things that came out, or a couple of things that came out, was that there's some support in there, and it's slowly happening. In one government department that I know of, they've actually implemented NVDA into their test SOE environment. It's a little step. But there are other gaps as well. In a couple of the stories that came out from these people, little things like just opening a document in Trim through the assistive technology. And that starts to think about this ICT procurement and Australian standards that, yes, we might say that we're going to meet it, but how are we actually checking that it's been done? The other thing that they mentioned was the problems that came out of those enterprise-wide software and hardware kind of issues. So embedding accessibility early in the procurement process is something. In the short time I was at the DTA, I worked with the procurement area, and we've got Ben here, which is lovely. We started to think about how we could do that, that check that needs to happen, or even just get that upfront idea of what's happening with industry. So, and we thought about, well, let's bring things in a bit earlier. And we came up with some benefits for that it would meet Australian standards if we could actually do that check and make sure those products and services were not only just procured, but then they came with some kind of check to say that they were already accessible. The other benefits were to ensure the new products were usable and accessible in the workplace. So even once they were procured, when they were actually then put across the whole of government and went into different environments and different agencies, they weren't customised to actually turn off that accessibility option. We found out a little bit more about the VPAT and the global template, thanks to a lot of people in this room. And we also knew that there were going to be benefits across development and update costs if we could get this in a bit earlier. But the main thing that we kind of worked out was that there was a lack of education and training across different sectors. So we've got a few people in the room. We've got some industry people to find out what are they doing internationally to actually set the accessibility in place, and that's where we talked about the VPAT and the conformance statements, and I've since found out about SAP's ASD. And we also did some empathy mapping. We had some accessibility practitioners, and we also had some procurement officers who weren't necessarily across what accessibility meant. And we did some empathy mapping about what their needs and roles were. And we did some experimentation about those different templates that are out there. And we thought maybe we could identify some opportunities for education and training. One of the things that we... Oh, come back to that was the last slide. That's it. So what we came out of that was that we needed to really educate procurement officers. And while Susanna's been here this week, she's been in Canberra actually doing that with Ben's team. So we've actually started getting things rolling. With the whole of government procurement, they're also trialling for the hardware panel to actually send in what you have to show that you're compliant, and that whether that's a VPAT and a conformance statement, and also find out if there's anything else that people are using. And then they're going to reuse that and assess that maybe for some other panels down the track. And if you'd like to know more, maybe I can put you in touch with those people as we work on those. The other side of it was the industry side. When we did that empathy mapping, it was really interesting to see the roles and the needs for the industry of what they wanted to get out of it. They really wanted to work closer with procurement people and with the government instead of just throwing things over. So they also want to be able to train, and that's where I think this great connection of bringing Susanna in to our conference and the procurement area was great. And the one that we're all here for is around accessibility practitioners, because if we are going to put these kind of templates in place, and then we're going to need those procurement officers and those agencies are going to need to go and do those tests. It won't just be digital anymore that we'll be testing as practitioners. It'll be that hardware and software as well, and that could be spot checks. So this was an opportunity this afternoon to actually have Susanna talk about those templates and for us all to learn a little bit more about how we can use them if we get asked to, share the knowledge maybe with other procurement officers. And maybe what we learned from this is that there might be some other ways that we can feed back to Ben and the team of how to improve those templates. And even VPAT and the other areas that create those templates are happy to take our feedback and actually improve them themselves. So we can do this in an iterative way. There's another area that I haven't talked about, or we didn't invite in the room, that we identified should be invited in the room. And that is the Ict Security. And Jocelyn mentioned that with the SAP, to make sure your administrators are on board. Because one of the things that it's going to be quite important is having all the tools and everything to test as SOE upgrades happen across agencies as well. So I'm going to now open the floor to Susanna, who's going to talk about the templates, unless anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. You're a very brave audience because there is not one line more than the heading showing what I'm going to talk about or do this last hour. So I'm happy that you're here, and I'm sort of thinking to myself, should I dance or play music or do something else? Because